AAC, and the NNPP. Today, we bring you an overview of those discussions and take a look at what to expect from the next three conversations with the candidates of the Labour Party, the People's Democratic Party, and the All Progressives Congress. My guests today are Chika Agu, the co-host of the morning show on Radio Now 95.3 FM, and Confidence McHarry, a senior analyst at SPM Intelligence. And also joining me is Camry Apollo, a journalist. We'll start off with a brief look at the first conversation with Prince Adewale Adebayo and Malam Yusuf Buhari of the Social Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Prince Adebayo and Malam Yusuf, for joining us on the candidates and for saying yes to this important conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
So my question goes to you, sir. You mentioned the section which you feel that can help create employment, the 30 million jobs. So I wanted to say something. The film industry is creating millions of jobs and contributing to various economies globally. So in your 5 sectors, you did not mention the creative sector. What happened to the creative sector? Because when you check other countries, even our neighboring countries here like Kenya, South Africa, the film industry alone can create the 30 million jobs. I'm sure of it. So what about the creative sector? Did you forget it, or is it something you don't have in mind at all?
The creative sector, we are not neglecting it. We are looking at the companies that are met in Washington, D.C., areas where they have interest. It doesn't mean that we on our own will not do anything. Actually have an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce on 2,000 companies, identified companies coming here to work on those sectors. It doesn't mean on our own we're not going to do it. So I was reporting how we can rapidly generate 30 million jobs. So that's on that one. On the issue of creating 30 million jobs, it's not that complicated. The issue is that activity-based costing, activity bring employment. If you don't do activities, you don't invest in works, you are not going to get the employment.
Right. So, Confidence, I'm going to start off with you. You heard his response to that, and perhaps I'll get a quick reaction. Were you satisfied? Did it seem like he was actually ready for it?
Yeah, I would have to give him the credit that there was not enough time to do justice to that question, because the topic of creation of employment in a country where you're looking at least 33.3% unemployment rate is not something that could be trashed under just a few seconds. It takes the whole of state in terms of not just policies, politics, and so many other things. So I didn't quite get what he said about meeting people in Washington, D.C. and everything, but in terms of government sector-led operation, in terms of delivering employment with the creative sector or the creative industry in Nigeria, we have seen such interventions before in the past. We had the Jonathan administration give at least 200 million naira to Nollywood about 10 years ago. And if you ask people in Nollywood who received such grants from the government, they will tell you that it did go a long way into financing some of the operations. So I think they got better for it. But at least over the past few years, we've not seen that kind of government interest in that. But all we've seen is more regulations, in the sense that there are some laws, not only from the federal side, but also from the state government side, to actually stifle some creativity. And as a result, many of the young people are moving out. So if I am to make an input in that particular axis of using the creative sector to drive employment, I think one of the first things to do would remove some of the restrictions that the government has placed in that part, and it would also start with reviewing the hate speech bill and some of the hate speech laws that have been put in place, among several others. So you're looking at a lot of partnerships, and then primarily removing some of the obstacles that the government has put in place to make that sector to thrive. So it's a cash, or is a cow that loses, or the, I don't know, there's a way it's said that it's the goose that lays the golden egg. But one thing the government can do, even if they don't want to do too much, is just to make sure that they are not standing in the way of the progress of that particular sector.
Right. And Camry, I want to come to you, right? Because the subject of the conversation, as much as the question was around the creative sector, there's a promise to create 30 million jobs, right? And previous administrations have promised just as much. We've seen that you can't focus on just one side of Nigeria and think that you will survive there. So we're talking creation of jobs, but we're in a place where we don't have the money. We still are not certain if we're operating a mixed economy or a capitalist economy or a socialist economy. I'm wondering what you think about the SDP candidate and whether he will define what our economy is, enough to allow the creation of those jobs.
Creating 30 million jobs, especially in a country of 200 million people, is a big ask. It's not going to be an immediate thing. But I believe the presidential candidate of the SDP was referring to the low-hanging fruit. What can we do now? Yes, we don't have funding. We're in a rut when it comes to debt management and so on and so forth. But the areas where you can realize these massive numbers are areas like agriculture and, nobody likes to hear this, but infrastructural development. Because these are sectors that allow for these jobs, first of all, to be created. Secondly, they generate income as they go along. They grow the economy. They are very important if you are talking about expanding your GDPs and so on and so forth. So agriculture, construction industry, absolutely. The Chinese have done this. They've shown the whole world it's very possible. I believe about 10 odd years ago, their investment in infrastructure was about 25% of their GDP. They built roads so fast that people wondered, what on earth is going on? Don't forget, this is a country, 1.4 billion people. They think in terms of half centuries, not 5 or 10 years.
Right.
So sooner or later, all that infrastructure will be needed. But the important thing, people have jobs today. So low-hanging fruit, construction, agriculture. But there's a challenge with agriculture. Agriculture is tied to security. So just like many sectors in Nigeria, they're all sort of linked, aren't they?
So I do want to come in,
Yeah.
interrupt you for a moment, because I remember that conversation. There was a back and forth between the candidate and the moderator on the subject matter, skilled versus unskilled jobs, and the sectors you've just mentioned.
Unskilled.
Exactly.
Precisely.
And
Because if you look at the unemployment markets, look at the demographics of the people there. There are a lot more blue-collar jobs that need to be filled as opposed to white-collar jobs. I've always held the opinion, honestly, that regarding education in the country, our focus ought to be in basic education, where you can equip people with enough skills to create wealth. We need a lot more in terms of entrepreneurial education rather than academic degrees and so on and so forth. What we need are skills. So I think that's what he's speaking to. Now, I don't know the companies he met in the US and what it is, but you talk about 30 million jobs in a country of 200 million people. Along the short, medium term, it has to be those two sectors.
Right. So Chika, I mean, this is you happen to be a young person who you understand the creative sector that was mentioned, right? And over the last year, I believe we've seen quite a boom. We've seen global recognition, but that recognition has largely centered around specific individuals, not so much the entire industry. And I don't know if I can say that we are seeing it spread down to the bottom, the entire ladder of the industry. If you have the SDP candidate not really giving tangible, specific answers when it comes to this industry, do you have any hopes that we will be thinking outside the box if the SDP candidate is to win the seat?
So here's my thing with the creative industry and the way he responded to it, right? He made it seem like the creative industry, is something that he shouldn't make a priority. And I think that that response he gave is flawed. When he says, "Look, I wanted to focus on this because these were the companies that I met in the USA, and they are the ones who have identified 2,000 companies that they want to establish and blah blah." I think that the way he glossed over the creative, industry response, doesn't give me enough hope that that there's a major plan there. And again, I might be wrong. There's only so much you can say in 2 hours. But I guess my answer would be anyone who is coming in, right, better have a big plan for the creative industry. And this is why the creative industry will earn us more money than agriculture will in a few years. And why I'm confident, even though I don't have the details or the data to back that up, is that when you look at the amount of money that the few who are in there are making, right? versus the skill sets they need to go in there. You realize that, the people going in there are highly skilled. There's so few of them, right? But they're making a lot of money. So if we can create more of those people, more of those skilled people, flood the entire global markets with them, you can only imagine how much more money will be coming in here. Again, you have to understand that the creative sector is largely exporting, whatever it is that they're making here. So people in Kenya and South Africa and, the USA and Canada and other parts of the world are watching Nollywood movies. They are streaming Nigerian music. It's earning us a lot of forex, right? At least for the act and the creative involved. So now we should start thinking of building the companies that can rival the global giants that would make sure that these monies are coming to Nigeria first before they go anywhere else in the world. At the moment, a lot of them are going to the USA before they come to Nigeria. So, I mean, he needs to think of how can I use this place, this sector to bring in more money, right, that will fund other things as opposed to treating it like an afterthought, like it seemed, it was for him when he sat down with Kadria.
Right. And, I mean, it's still a large conversation. And kind of like Confidence said earlier on, it was really just 2 hours. And that's just a small part of the plans they have for the economy. But I'd like us to move on to what was our next conversation. Next up is our look at the second conversation on the candidate with Mr. Omoyele Sowore and his running mate, Barrister Haruna Garba Magashi of the Africa Action Congress.
Welcome, Mr. Sowore and Malam Magashi, and thank you for saying yes to our invitation to join this town hall.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time. Now,
Mr. Sowore, it is not new to anybody that most public office holders have decided to send their children abroad to study. And for this reason, they are insensitive to the plight of an average Nigerian student caused by incessant strikes. Sir, as a former student union leader, how do you plan to put an end to these industrial actions, to these incessant industrial actions in public universities?
See, this is something I know very well because I track this, and you're a journalist. We used to do this together. I track how much money is spent in sending children of the rich at the expense of the poor to school. You discover that an average son of a politically connected or a politically exposed person going to a school in the UK is spending over maybe £200,000 a year, the big schools. And if you break that down to Naira, it could almost build a building, a structure that has over 6 classrooms that is of the highest standard. They are stealing it from you. That is why I said, as part of our policy, that whereas we have no right to stop anybody from sending their children to school abroad, but they also have no right to steal our money to send their children to school abroad. And as a result, those monies that are retained, we will use it to give study grants to students that are going to school in Nigeria. In Denmark, Norway, students are paid to stay in school to the point that sometimes when they are supposed to spend 4 years in school, they spend 6 because they don't want to go.
What's the population of Denmark?
No. Stop talking about the population. The population of Nigeria is big. The problem is the population of the thieves.
Right. So, I mean, there is a part of that conversation that essentially focused on the theft, right?
Yeah.
But it's a big conversation, and presently we're still in a tight spot especially with tertiary education in the country. We know where things are right now between ASU and the federal government. And Confidence, I want to start with you, right? There's a lot that we essentially put at risk with our approach to education. So as much as her question was on, stopping the rich, if you like, from sending their children out to school abroad, there's the direct effect of that, which is they get priority sometimes when it comes to foreign exchange. There's not enough attention to building of infrastructure for education. Our curriculum is outdated to a large extent. I know what I studied in school, and I know how that turned out. So I'm wondering if, just based on his response, and she drew on his experience as a student union leader, do you think that he can actually solve the problem?
In the first place, the first thing we should note is that Nigeria is not a country that is out of law. We have quite a lot of laws. We have the civil service rules, we have ministerial code of conduct, and so the question I would ask Sowore is: you have said you're going to stop people from sending their awards abroad for education. So the first question is how? How do you plan to do that? Yes, those laws exist. If he gets into office, he's going to even do more to tighten the law. But you have to factor in you have to account for the fact that law enforcement has been some of Nigeria's biggest problem. And not just enforcement, impunity is also a problem. So he has to take impunity into account. And then secondly, to solve the issue of tertiary education and the perennial issue of a lecturer strike in the country, the question we should also be first asking ourselves is, in 2022, should the federal government be in charge of tertiary education? So education in the country is three-layered. There is the primary education, there is secondary education, and there's also the tertiary education. So according to how the constitution is set, the local government and the states are supposed to be the one running primary education, and the federal government is supposed to be running tertiary education. But over time, I think since the Ali Must Go protest in the 1970s, we have seen that much decline in the sense that even just members of the elite, I'm not even talking about the ruling class now, just members of the elite, middle class, do not even feel comfortable enough to send their children to public universities. So what they either do is they build enough connections to get forex to send their children abroad, or they send them to private schools in the country, which are much, much better run than the federal public school system. So to solve the perennial issue of strikes, first of all, we need to get the government out. And getting the government out of funding tertiary education as a right of responsibility is not an immediate job. It's something we have to plan for in the first place. So ASU currently has a problem, which is 2009 agreement that they had with the federal government of Umaru Musa Yar'Adua that is not implemented now. So the first step the government needs to do now is honor that agreement. And so after that, you have to look at a way where you can get the universities to be self-sufficient in terms of grants, emoluments, so many other things. How are some of the best universities in the world, especially in the US, run? Are they getting grants by the government? No, they're not necessarily funded by the government in terms of monthly payments and all of that. These are research grants that they're given to them in collaboration for a specific project. So what the public school system, especially at the university level, is supposed to do in Nigeria is to look at how they can be self-governing. They're already self-governing because if the government wants to interfere sometimes, they actually meet a brick wall. So, but what they are not doing is that they want to collect government money, but they don't want the government to dictate, number one, how they are paid and how they also run the affairs of the school. And it's not going to work that way. So they should be focused on not just getting grants, but also removing government interference in exactly how the schools are run. So until we begin to get much more investment, especially in the private sector, I don't think we're going to solve this issue of educational strikes and all of that going forward.
So Camry, based on what Confidence has just said, I mean, if we go back to what Mr. Shore's point was, he essentially said, look, we're going to plug the holes where they're stealing the money and using that money to send their kids to school. But then Confidence also speaks about, he takes up from there and speaks about the ASU factor, right? Especially with the payment platform, we know that's a big issue. So there's always two sides to the story. Hearing what Mr. Shore has decided that he will do you think that ASU would be willing to meet him halfway?
First thing I'm going to say is I think Mr. Shore has done very well in his town hall. And the reason I say that is this. He's an idealist, first of all. Idealism, it's all well and good. If you look at the electorate in Nigeria, will respond to statements like the statements made by Mr. Shore. Somebody who tells you, I'm going to come in, I'm going to end this, I'm going to stop this, I'm going to do this, that, the other. On that basis, I say he's done very well for his town hall. He's, I'm not going to say, disrespect him by sending his plate to the gallery, but he understands the electorate. But beyond that, he is a fiery person. He's an activist. And the times we are in right now, as far as the country goes, we're on the brink once again. Nigeria is always on the brink before every general election. When we come to a general election, we say it's make or break, make or mar. a country should have disintegrated 1 billion times in the past, and so on and so forth. Not a problem. We're very passionate about politics, about religion, some other sentiments, and this, that, the other. So I think his town hall, to me, he's hit the mark. He was vintage, omoyele, sure. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people who are given to idealism. Because again, looking at the electorate, the people who determine who our leaders are at the topmost level.
So Camry,
Yes.
I'll interrupt you for a moment. Here's why I asked the question the way that I do. The
Yes.
present administration also made promises, right?
Yes, it
And some of these promises they were good. Lofty ideas that, if they were able to implement fully, Nigeria would be such a fantastic place based on those ideas.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm asking, because what you say on the campaign trail can be entirely different from what you meet on the ground by the time you step into office. Is there a possibility that the education sector, tertiary as it is right now, would be willing to meet the candidate of the AAC halfway in his dreams for the country?
I would say it's not impossible because he is, after all, talking about enriching our education system. He's against taking resources out of the country. I don't know about stealing and this, that, the other, but regarding developing Nigeria's education sector, he's pro-development. But then again, it's one thing to want to be an astronaut. Do you have the physiological capabilities of being an astronaut? I could sit here and tell you, look, I was raised to believe I could be all I can be. I want to win the 100 meters race tomorrow. Biologically, it's not possible. So I can wish him once away all I desire. So yes, his intentions are one thing. The reality on the ground are yet another. Nigeria's education sector, it's a very, very big conversation, much like our critical sectors, truth be told. And the idealism, you can't do away with it, but it sometimes really is very, very far removed from the practical steps that are needed. There are some problems that, unfortunately, regarding statehood, we won't be able to correct. They will auto-correct when we address other sectors which interface with them. So to take a problem and try to remove it out of the Nigerian context and say, I'm going to fix this like a car engine, I'm going to fix the carburetor alone and the car will run fine, I think is a dream.
Right.
You need to sort out the entire vehicle, which parts need changing, which need servicing, which need replacement, which needs this, that, the other. So that's the way I see the country. Everything is intertwined and linked together. So idealism, as I said, that's his style. Regarding his town hall, I think he's hit the mark. The first one we treated, he's campaigning on the basis of, I'm going to come in and the truth must be told. We're going to be very sincere and honest. Again, these are desires, these are wishes that define these two presidential candidates. But does the system itself that we have created carefully over the last couple of decades, will the system allow for them to actualize what they are selling? Should they emerge presidents? That's a different question entirely. Perception is one thing. Reality sometimes doesn't align with perception, but perception is very important. And I think Mr. Shora explained to perception, and he's doing so very well.
So Chika, I mean, much of the conversation around education in the country is always at the tertiary level, right? And I find it interesting because when the candidates do engage with the conversation around education, it's one of two things. They're either discussing the out-of-school children, or they're discussing the incessant strikes in our tertiary system. But when they discuss the incessant strikes, the tertiary system, it's a lot more, it's closer, it's something that's, they can stretch back into their memory and talk about when I was in university. The AAC candidate talks about, everybody knows his track record as a student union leader. But if I were to ask, even around this table now, go back to primary school, the foundational level, go back to secondary school, right? What would that be like? And I'm wondering if just based on what the candidate has said, do you think that they're equipped in any way to actually think about what foundational level needs beyond just getting the kids back into school?
So based off the conversation that they had, I think that, just like Camry said, there was a lot of idealism there, right? Which, in all honesty, makes a lot, isn't a bad thing, but Nigeria is in such a place where we need to be, we need to be a little bit more pragmatic with our approach to addressing education. And part of that pragmatism requires that we tell ourselves some uncomfortable truth, right? That the whole system has essentially gone to the dogs. And so everybody needs to decide what part of this system they want to claw back in 4 years. Because 8 years is not guaranteed anyone. So if Omoyele Sowore is saying, look, I can't stop anybody from taking their child out of the country to study elsewhere, but I can make sure that they're not doing it with Commonwealth of the people, right? Then that's money saved for us. And quite frankly, I don't think that's a bad idea. That's more money. That's more forex that can go into, building more classrooms here. That's more money that would stay in, providing books for libraries and computers and internet and, dormitories. That's more money that we could use here. If you decide that out of the abundance of your personal wealth, again, not taken from public coffers, that you want to send your child abroad, then that's all right. But so if all Sowore wants to do is block the leakage, like he says, that allows for people to send their own child to school or their children to school outside the country with the commonwealth of millions of other Nigerians, and if that's all he's able to achieve in 4 years, I personally think that ASUU will be better for it. So one problem at a time. Whoever is going to come after his own 4 years, take another part of the problem and deal with it, because we didn't get here in 1 year. So.
Granted, but I'll still take you back a moment, right? Because again, I am wondering about foundational versus tertiary, right?
Yeah.
And I do understand that the primary, secondary school level, you go to local governments and state governments for. But every time we talk about out-of-school children, it's a federal government problem, isn't it? Even if the states have the problem, it's still, the buck essentially still gets passed on. And this is why I'm coming back to the question around whether, precedence should be given to that foundational level as opposed to a tertiary level that is, it's broken, but it functions in some way or the other.
Right. So here's the thing, right? So how is education in Nigeria currently funded? UBEC gets money from the federal government, distributes to state and local governments, right? So if the people at the federal level are stealing these monies, it means that whatever goes to UBEC is not enough. If the people at the federal level are stealing this money, it means that what the government can invest into other programs that bring back money into its coffers is not enough. So if UBEC will be getting, $10 billion a year or 10 billion naira a year for distribution to schools, because of theft, it goes from 10 to 9 to 6.
Right.
Like that. So we must make sure that if all Sowore wants to do again is block the leakage, it means UBEC has more money for primary schools and secondary schools.
So
it means tertiary institutions get what they get.
I want to take us to the last of the 3 town halls, right? The first 3 that have gone by. It was a sit down with the presidential candidates of the New Nigeria People's Party, Senator Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso, and his running mate, Bishop Isaac Idahosa. Let's take a look.
Good evening and welcome to the third in a series of 6 town halls that bring the major contenders for Nigeria's presidency face to face with the electorate that will decide who gets the top job. Again, I am Kadria Ahmed, your anchor this evening, and we are going to start today with the candidates of the New Nigeria People's Party, NNPP.
Whereas UNESCO's minimum recommendation is that 25% of the national budget be allocated to the education sector. As a concerned Nigerian student, I want to know how the candidate intends to fund the education sector to bring back its lost glory. Thank you.
Okay,
are you sure they are from Kano? I don't think so. I don't think they are from
These
Kano.
are Bayero University students.
Yes, from Bayero University.
Yes.
You see, those in Kano, in my opinion, shouldn't be in a hurry to ask those.
Right.
Why? Yes, because ideally they should know the way we operated in. You see,
Maybe
what
these ones
we
are too
invested-
young.
Yeah, but maybe they just want other Nigerians to to know.
Yeah.
You see, what we invested in Kano was more than the recommended 25%. And what we have today in our blueprint, if we have an opportunity to implement them, definitely it will be more than 25% of the national budget.
Do you think part of the problem why perhaps they may not remember is because your legacy hasn't endured? And if it hasn't,
maybe
what do you think is the problem?
I don't want to go into that. You see, if you go into government, what you will do is to ensure your success from day one up to the last day. What happens behind you, you have little or no control of that.
Right.
And I don't think anybody will hold you responsible.
So, this part of the conversation, I'm just going to get quick reactions from each of you, right? And I want us to focus on legacy. And legacy, not just in terms of positive legacy, but negative as well. We already know the coming administration will inherit a lot of problems, including in education, like the senator was speaking of right there. And I'm wondering, just confidence, we get your thoughts first, what it means, you know, when that legacy is positive or negative, and what the next administration will do with it.
First of all, to speak on that is to acknowledge theoretically how governance is supposed to be continual.
Right.
You know, for instance, I could make allusions to what is essentially American foreign policy, and the respect for the rights of nations to exist. There's so many idealistic talking points, but you know that the practical application of that, it's a little bit different. But one thing you could say for certain is that successive US presidents will come in and they're going to maintain that blueprint. So even no matter how much the Trump presidency tried to rock the boat, you could still understand that some of Trump's actions in terms of the foreign relations, it's still part of America's blueprints. That is understanding how much of a continuum of government is. But in Nigeria, it is simply not so. And this is because the laws that are supposed to tie some of these legacies or some of these actions are not only strong enough, but I think the unmoving or the immovable force that is the president, because given how much the president has powers, according to the Constitution, 62% of the powers of the Constitution is rested on the exclusive list, which of course is manned by the federal government, and the president is the executive of the federal government. It's so easy, basically, to undo what the other person has done. For instance, the Obasanjo administration started the power sector reforms. So many things to be done. As the senator just mentioned now that, you can do your own, but you don't know what the other person is going to come along and do. That's exactly what happened with the power sector. The Obasanjo administration did its own part. The Yar'Adua administration came and did so many things. So the Goodluck Jonathan administration came, and we have to go back again to start from the beginning. And so that's exactly where we are. So I shared so much of Mr. Kwankwanso's opinion when he says that you can only do so much. But given the kind of terrain we operate in Nigeria, where the president of the country is so powerful that he can do and basically undo in the Nigerian context, it leaves only so much to hope that whatever he have done actually continues to endure.
So, Camry, I come to you. And just based on that, right, next administration, they can do whatever they want. It's almost like, setting yourself up, because when you enter office, again, there are very great policies. What do you think that the legacy will be, passing on from this current administration to an administration that could probably see Senator Kwankwaso in office?
It hurts to actually talk about this, and the reason is this. Our President Muhammadu Buhari, has already told the entire country, look, all I want to do is just finish my term and go home. And it's such a shame, because he set the precedence for a lack of continuity, a lack of legacy. There are many people in positions of leadership. We have very few leaders. I think the electorate needs to wake up to this. Government is a continuum, yes. There are problems that can be fixed along the short, medium, and long term. If you come into office, let's say a state chief executive or a country, president of a country, you've got plans. Now, some of your plans might be, realizable within your tenure of 4 years, 8 years, and this, that, the other. But you will weigh on certain sectors that require generations to fix. This is the reality. So to not be concerned, to not be bothered, I think is a very, very individualistic and selfish way to look at nation building. Countries are built by people who sacrifice. And so if you find yourself in a position of leadership, you come with your plan, you know what you want to do, you should realize what you can achieve. You should also realize what will be left undone. Now, to be called a true leader, you should start to give thought to the unfinished work and who will come and inherit. Lagos is a very good example. Lagos realized massive developments because the sense of continuity stretched for about 16, 20 years. You didn't have a governor come in and say, you know what, forget what the other one did, I'm going to start mine. That's not how countries are built. So I think leaders need to give a lot of thought to that. Those who do not, I'm sorry, they are just people in positions of leadership. They are not leaders.
All right, Chika, perhaps we get your thoughts as well. Enduring legacy, and I mean, Camry makes a reference to Lagos, but you know what the conversations on the side are, which is that there is also an enduring presence in every subsequent administration. Do we need something of that nature when it comes to sectors in the country? People who actually essentially stand in the gap and make sure that development passes from this end to that end and we're actually seeing a growth.
Sure, yes, I do think so. And that's why we need institutions, right? And to be honest, I think it was a failure on his part when he said that there's not much you can do after you've left office, because that's a lie. You actually, there's a lot that you can do. If you've built something, if I built something here that I know will benefit the people coming after me, I would ensure that it is protected, at all costs, right? It's why parents take out life insurance policies for their children, right? Because I might die tomorrow, right? But it's why parents leave a will rather, because I might die tomorrow and I want a lawyer to be able to say, look, pass this thing on to my children. That lawyer represents the institution, right, for that family. I might as well just say, hey, look, whatever you want to do with it, do with it. But when there's a lawyer, there's a will, there's a trust. It says when this child is 18, give them such and such amount of money. When they get married, give them such and such amount of money. That's what the trust is. He failed to do that. So when Kadria said maybe they don't connect with what you've done because your legacy doesn't endure, I think she was spot on the money. And in that moment, I think, Mr. Kwankwaso failed his people. So you have a structure where you're taking students from Nigeria, from Kano State, you're taking them to school abroad. There is you're not making them sign a bond to say, look, you come back here and serve the state after a while. I think that didn't make any sense, because even these foreign countries, when they give scholarships to Nigerians, you have to say that at the end of your program, you will go back to your country. In most cases, I don't think there's a big deal in doing that. If you're training people with if you're training a few with the Commonwealth of millions, the people should be able to say, yes, I will come back home and take care of the millions who've paid their taxes to send me to school. So in that situation, I would say that Kwankwaso failed to build a legacy.
Right. At this moment, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we'll discuss the Labour Party, the PDP, and the APC, who will sit down with Kadria Ahmed over the next 3 days. You're still watching the Halftime Pundit Show on The Candidates 2022.
Daria Media, in association with Cabal Entertainment, presents The Candidates, a presidential town hall meeting series where the presidential candidates of the 6 leading political parties tell us about their plans for the country. Join Kadria Ahmed as she leads us into the world of these candidates from the 17th to the 23rd of November 2022. This very important program will be streamed on FRCN, Radio Now, DSTV, NTA, Facebook, YouTube, and more. This is a town hall meeting you shouldn't miss. Tune in. Let's hear from the candidates.
Choosing where to study is one of the biggest decisions you will make in life. So, it is important to get it right. At Cole City University, Enugu, Nigeria, We pride ourselves on providing students a stable academic calendar and education of international standards. Coal City University gives students incredible personal attention and support. You can enroll in our regular programs and obtain a degree exclusively awarded by Coal City University. Alternatively, you can enroll in our International Pathway programs, which will enable you earn 2 degrees in 4 years from Coal City University and Delaware State University, United States. Visit www.ccu.edu.ng. Coal City University, education for self-actualization.
Welcome back. I am Nabila Osman, and you're watching the Halftime Pundit Show on The Candidate, a Daria Media Town Hall series brought to you with the support of the MacArthur Foundation and in partnership with the Nigerian Television Authority, Cabal Entertainment, Zikoko Citizen, Silverbird Television, FRCN, Radio Now, Trust TV, News Central Television, Indenja Media TV, and Kaftan TV. My guests today are Confidence Makari, a senior analyst with SBM Intelligence, and journalist Chika Agu, who is the co-host of the morning show on Radio Now 95.3 FM, as well as Camry Apollo, a journalist. You can be part of this conversation by using our social media on your screens. Now, over the next 3 days, we will be speaking with 3 more parties here on The Candidates, and I'd like us to discuss what to expect, what will be the focal points of their conversations for both the candidates and their parties. We'll begin in the order they are expected to appear. Now, the Labour Party seems to have gathered quite a momentum over the course of the campaign season. And there are some who talk about, it being that it's the influence of their presidential candidate. And I'm wondering where the party stands in terms of the influence of their candidate versus the influence of the party. Confidence, perhaps you want to weigh in.
Yeah, the first thing we should look at is the wider landscape on which Nigeria's politics operates on. I'm saying this because we have the presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Mr. Peter Obi, who identifies as a trader and kind of a capitalist in orientation, given his economic outlook. And then you have the Labour Party, which is essentially a socialist movement, politically. I mean, for countries in the West who operates the Labour Party system, you could see the ideologies is mostly fundamentally socialist and kind of populist to an extent, but the populism is a left-wing kind of populism. But what we're currently seeing in Nigeria is a marriage of strange bedfellows, in a manner of speaking. And this is why this thing is not mattering so much, is because there is this notion that Nigeria's politics is devoid of ideology. Anybody can walk into any party, and you don't even have to subscribe to the ideals of the party, and that works for you, because the parties themselves do not necessarily have to follow dogmatically whatever they have set to do. And so it's so easy, to walk into that particular party, pick up their presidential nomination or whatever position you're standing on, and then just give out your own manifesto,
right.
Devoid of what the party might have set in motion, that this is exactly what we think. Because if you look at the Labour Party today, one of the major driving force at the background of Mr. Obi's popularity or his supposed structure is the Nigerian Labour Congress. And if you look at the Nigerian Labour Congress, it is a socialist movement. So to answer your question directly as to where the party versus the candidate stands, I think so far they have done well. The disagreement that dogmatically looking at party versus candidate is expected to come out into the fore has been better handled. But the problem is that the focus has always been much on the presidential candidate compared with candidates that are running for not only states, but also in other positions of governance, such as the National Assembly, the House of Assembly, and everything. And from this, you could sense a feeling that the Labour Party is hedging its entire bet on the presidency and just a few states, perhaps Lagos, Abia, Enugu, and the rest of them. And this is quite problematic on the short term, Because to win a presidential election in Nigeria, and to succeed after, you need the input of state governors. State governors have a lot of control, more than we even give them credit for. But the silver lining to what the Labour Party will be banking on is the fact that, as I said earlier, the Nigerian political system is devoid of ideology.
Right.
So we are going to see, if the presidential candidate of the Labour Party eventually wins, we're going to see a lot of cross-carpeting from members of other parties.
Just very quickly, right, this cross-carpeting, it's interesting because obviously he will need the National Assembly to be able to implement much of what he would want to do as president. And he has been touted as a man of ideals, right? Integrity, and I use that word carefully, knowing what it means within,
Right.
Popular conversations right now. But what would it look like to have the lawmakers cross-carpeting to the Labour Party when essentially it's against the law?
Well, it's against the law doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. And
No, what would it look like? Would it be a stain on the image of the party that has essentially been campaigning on integrity, something new, sticking to the books, all of that?
Yeah, Mr. Apollo just a few minutes ago talked about, talking or playing to the gallery when,
Right.
The other candidates were speaking and everything. We should also be talking about how pragmatic, some of not only personal politics come to play, but also policies. I don't think that a Peter Obi presidency will be averse to having members of other political parties, join his own party.
Right.
I don't even think that the Labour Party itself will be averse to such an idea. So yes, it might be illegal according to the Constitution, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And if it does eventually happen, I'm not sure the man is going to say no, because it's going to work politically to his advantage.
All right. So, Cameron, I want to come to you and we'll move to the PDP. This is a party that it's hardly new to the game, whether as an opposition party or a party that has governed, and they happen to have a presidential candidate who is also not new to the game, especially in trying to clinch the ticket and the seat of president. And I'm wondering if you think, based on what you've seen, right, are you seeing something new? Is it a case of, we as a party and I as a candidate have learned from essentially our failure in the past, and we're bringing something new to the table, and that's something new will guarantee us the seat?
I don't think so. I believe the People's Democratic Party's candidate is going to play on a continuation from the 2019 general elections, where they still believe they won. So they're going to take off from there, and you can expect him to play up on things like a unity. He's going to talk about how he's going to unite the country. He's going to talk about the state of security and his plans to make us all secure. You can expect him to talk about sorting out the economy. He's a businessman. Let me reserve my adjectives for now. He is a businessman, somebody with vast experience in the public and the private sector and governance as well. So I think you can expect him to play to those strengths and hold it up as an alternative to Nigerians and say, all right, look, this is what I see the problem to be. This is what I've done. And this is what I'm bringing to the table. You make your choice. Who would his main contender be? At this point, it's still a bit iffy with the entrance of the party that Makari just talked about now. The Labour Party, there's still talk about how the things will go. But I think you can expect at least these three things from the People's Democratic Party's candidate: unity, security, the economy. He's going to play up a really, really good chat. All right, he will spin a very, very good yarn. Will it be believed by people? That's down to your perception. But he does have the mileage, all right, in these areas, public and private sector. He's made certain propositions as far back as recent as 2019, where he's actually proposed a shift into a open market system. Economists will tell you, well, that's a very good idea. But I think as far as the electorates are concerned, they're a bit more concerned about the issue of trust rather than the workability of the idea he's going to try to resell to them. So it's rather a trust issue. I think that's the major problem.
All right. Now, Chika, I want to come to you with the APC, right? This is a key moment, mostly because the transition we are likely to see with the party, if they do clinch the seat, is a transition of one administration to the other, but the party remains the same. And based on Nigeria's political landscape, this is perhaps the true test of the party, right? 8 years have gone with one person in power, and we are on to another set of 4 years. Nigeria's landscape may be 8 years, right? And I'm wondering, their presidential candidate is someone who isn't new to governance. He's been a two-time governor of essentially the economic heart of Nigeria, Lagos State. But he's also up against the legacy of the current administration. Do you see, and I'm sure you've seen in the campaigns right now, much of what they've been doing is touting his successes, if you like, as governor of Lagos State. Is that likely to work against what is the current image of the party with the legacies of the present administration?
So it's a mixed bag, right? Because on one hand, Lagos is just one out of 35 or 36 states in the country, right? And so in a way, he can get away with, look, this is what I did in Lagos and this is what I did in Lagos. It worked, some people will say, oh yes, this actually did work, that actually did not work. It's always going to be a debate, right? He can get away with it. But in terms of trying to convince the rest of the country, now that's where he's going to face a bit of a challenge, and I don't know how he's going to do that. But really, like you've said, they're essentially playing up the 8 years he spent in office as the governor.
I mean, they're not the only ones. We do have a few former governors who are running.
And again, so like with Peter Obi, when he spoke earlier, like Peter Obi is always talking about what he did in Anambra State. Now, for the people who live in Anambra State, that's it's always going to be a debate. For the rest of the country, it's going to be a case of, okay, but what do you see as our own situation here? So I think that what the Labour Party, what the APC rather would have to do here is convince the rest of the country that, that a continuation of this current party at the highest level of governance in the country is it presents a better option for the rest of the country than any other option, right? And given the state of things in the country right now, I don't know how easy a task that will be, but I don't think that it's impossible. Right. So really it's up to the candidate to talk it up.
So I'd like to turn our attention to the general landscape of these elections we're going into come February 2023. There's a lot of new things to consider, right? We've got a new electoral act in the game, right? And it changes much of what we know. It guarantees quite a number of things, including the independence, financial independence of INEC, the use of the bimodal verification system. You've also got electronic transmission of results. Beyond that, we have what is the possibility of a runoff election. Pardon me. I want to start with you, Camry. For obvious reasons, right? You have seen quite a number of elections in this country, and you're not new to the game. Considering that Nigeria, I think about how, there's explicit rules. Don't declare elections until INEC has done so. And we've seen the effects of doing that, right? Declaring before INEC actually comes to say, look, this is the final result. And we know that we're a large nation. We've got polling units at over 100 and I think 30,000 across the country. I believe it's a larger number, but INEC has well over 100,000 polling units across the country. So that's a lot of work. If we do see a runoff, how prepared do you think Nigerians are for that? For a country where, even just without the runoff, sometimes we hear, no, the election was, I fear to use the word stolen, but, use it either way.
Look, the truth of the matter is the terrain is consistently changing, and are we prepared to accommodate any situation that could lead to violence and loss of life? I don't think we've done enough, unfortunately, and the government is always going to be the government, but I think the media has not really done a good enough job in educating people on how elections actually work. I say this because there are millions of people across now who already believe that we've already won. You look at the number of new entrants into the voting register, new votes, 9.5 million thereabout. About 75% of those are people under the age of between 18 and 34 years old. So there's a certain perception that we've already won. But we need to look at the numbers, and this is where I say the media has not done a good enough job. And how many people are actually educated on how the 2019 elections were won or lost, or the 2015 were won or lost, beyond saying, oh, we were rigged or it was stolen? Very, very few. All right. President Buhari. I think he won 15 million last elections, pretty much the same margin in 2015. The difference between him and the other party, the People's Democratic Party, it remains consistent. So basically, that's with a voter register of just over 80 million. We had, 26 million thereabouts coming out to vote. Voter apathy is still there. So I'm saying this, using this as an example to show that because you've got 9 million people going to get a PVC, please do not expect all 9 million to come out and vote. This is number one. Number two, there's the demographics of voting. There's the urban voting electorate. There's the rural voting electorate.
So Camry, I want to take that, but I'd like to throw it to Chika very quickly, right? Do you think that a possibility of a runoff, electronic transmission, will that push actual people to the polling unit?
Yes, I definitely think that it will. It will push a lot of people back to the polling unit. First of all, I think that the massive voter drive that we've seen much of this year, voter registration drive is down to people waking up to the fact that they need to be a lot more active in politics, right? And so we've been able to cross that hurdle. INEC seems to be, doing a good job so far, trying to convince people to come out and vote, although they need to do a lot more, right? I personally, I think INEC need a lot more ambassadors, people to actually go out and speak well of them. If there was if there was ever a time INEC needed goodwill ambassadors, it is now. So if they're able to go out there, convince Nigerians to actually leave their houses on election day and vote, and then tell Nigerians, look, whatever happens, whatever the worst is, we are ready for it. So if it comes down to a runoff, we are going to adequately address this. I think they're good.
Right. So look, confidence, I'm out of time, but I'm asking just very briefly about security and the impact on the legitimacy of the electoral process.
Well, to begin with, there's no contest or there's no question to the fact that large areas of the country are being held by armed groups. It's a recurring decimal in not just the north alone. We're seeing the same thing in the southeast and all of that. But in the first place, Nigeria's elections rather have always had a legitimacy problem. It doesn't even take insecurity to raise such issues.
Right.
In 2019, it was just 1 in 4 persons that elected the president of the country. 2019 rather. So which means that the presidency or the current president already has legitimacy issues. But when it comes to the elections going forward, one of the key things that INEC would have to deal with is the threat of supplementary elections. In the past, they have done it quite well. We've seen the same case in Osun, we saw it in Rivers in 2019 and everything. So what it would be planning to do in the immediate short term will be planning with the military, because most of the anti-insecurity operations in the country have been carried out by the military. So it would rest heavily on the strength of the military to carry out these clearance operations in order to allow INEC to do its job.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And that's it for the Halftime Pundit Show today on The Candidates. Tomorrow, you can join us again as the candidates of the Labour Party, His Excellency Peter Gregory Obi and his running mate, Dr. Datti Baba Ahmed, sit in conversation with Kadria Ahmed and take questions from Nigerians. We want to thank the MacArthur Foundation in partnership with the Nigerian Television Authority, Cabal Entertainment, Zikoko Citizen, Silverbird Television, FRCN, Radio Now, Trust TV, News Central Television, Njenje Media TV, and Kaftan TV. My name is Nabila Usman, and it's been a pleasure. Good evening.